I feel like the second we head on the path of dehumanization, even if it's something that's slight, maybe making fun of what someone looks like or the color of their hair or their fake tan, I just feel like it puts us on the path that can lead towards violence, right? Because I mean, what does Christian nationalism do? It dehumanizes the other. Immigrants are poisoning the blood of society. Democrats are demonic. A demonic spirit is inside of them. These are demons we're dealing with. I mean, Candace Owens famously said that transgender folks are demonic. They are demons. Well, you can't redeem a demon. Like, what do you do to demons? You destroy them, right? So I feel like when we start on that same path, and it can start, we can mask it with humor. Oh, this person has a big forehead. This person's so stupid. Okay, I get that. But like, first off, it doesn't actually address the argument. And number two, just tolerating that for me puts us on a path that I don't want to go down. And so, yeah, we don't do it perfectly, but especially as an organization, we just have a very strict policy of non-dehumanization. It doesn't matter who they are. We're never going to call Trump the big orange man. We're never going to make fun of Charlie Kirk's, the facial features. Like, it's not our vibe. But we will critique their rhetoric and their actions. We will call their ideas incredibly dangerous. We will oppose them at every step of the way. But we're going to do it in a way that's on principle and about the topic at hand, not about the person that they are. It's just one of those like lines in the sand for us as an org. We don't want to participate in that cycle of chaos, right? I mean, we believe that everyone is made in the image of God, even our enemies. So what does loving our enemies look like, even as they harm other people? Well, I think obviously it's resistance, but it's also refusing to participate in the cycle of dehumanization that they participate in, that their whole ethos is based off of.
Hi, friends. I hope you're enjoying your jog or doing those dishes or gardening or working out or that commute. I am so excited today because we are going to talk with Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals. Tim decided to get online and basically deconstruct for the world to see in real time. He talks about that in this episode. What I love so much is that Tim is always trying to engage people in good faith dialogue, in trying not to dehumanize, while also calling out white Christian nationalism and the atrocities that are occurring in the name of Jesus, and the fact that a lot of people who are white Christian nationalists are speaking as if all Christians believed the way they did, which is just so far from the truth. I love that Tim talks about those of us who were in, he calls it the basement of evangelical fundamentalism. And a lot of fundamentalism tries to keep us in that basement, but he walked out of that basement and he saw that there are rooms all over this beautiful house in God's house. And so that deeply resonates with me. I met Tim years ago at Theology Beer Camp, and he's just such a great guy and incredibly genuine. He has such a good heart and is also incredibly brave to enter a lot of these white Christian nationalist spaces. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this special interview with Tim Whitaker. Thank you so much, Tim.
There's beauty in unraveling, safety in the questioning. Home is where you're wandering. You're right where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be.
Welcome back, friends. I'm so excited to have Tim Whitaker on the podcast today. Thank you so much for being here, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
Tim is the founder and host of the New Evangelicals that I've been following for many years, and I've been very grateful for Tim's vulnerability and his willingness to be out there and wrestling and struggling and speaking up for very different lenses than we ordinarily see on social media and online. Tim basically created the New Evangelicals out of the fact that we were raised evangelical, but things just really didn't start adding up. The New Evangelicals hold space for honesty, for justice, for theological exploration. Through social media and podcasting and in-person events, Tim has built this thriving community of people, and it's reclaiming faith beyond just fundamentalism. He's known for this fierce commitment to nuance. My favorite thing is his good faith dialogue, that he's willing to have hard conversations, but in good faith. I think that's an incredible example for us. And this deep belief in the possibility of a more beautiful and a more Christ-like Christianity. So thank you so much. Welcome to the Sacred Slope.
Wow, what an intro. I mean, whew, yes, thank you. That's super kind.
Can you take us through your story? What are some of the early markers of your faith journey?
For some people, maybe super common experience. For others, maybe not so much. I grew up, in a very conservative Christian environment. I was homeschooled for 9 years. I went to a small private school after that, where I graduated top 5 in my class out of 6. So, I was really off to a great start. And, very much just in that white evangelical subculture that I'm sure many of your listeners have experienced. I did AWANA.
I did Awana.
Oh yeah, of course. How could you not, right? I did this parachurch organization stuff. I worked for an organization called Child Evangelism Fellowship, one of the biggest missions organizations promoting the gospel for boys and girls. I taught what's called their 5-day clubs in people's backyards as a teenager. I started drumming in the church pretty early on. So my whole upbringing was around church. My friends were in church. My social circles were in church. I was there 3 times a week, usually in the beginning. My parents were super committed, had a great family life. My dad was very consistent. He was the same person at church and at home, which I know for many people isn't their experience. So I was super fortunate to have a really solid foundation in that way. Even though they were both very conservative parents, they did a really good job raising us. And so that's kind of my background. I made a profession of faith early on, got baptized in the church early on, prayed the prayer many times just in case. Wanted to make sure I was definitely saved.
The rededication at church camps.
I don't want to go to hell, so it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to say it one more time,
Yeah.
just in case. Yeah, and I've also thrown things in the fire. I've thrown my sins in the fire. I've crucified my sins on the cross, etc. So I had a very typical young teenage, early adult, white evangelical experience for someone who wanted to get the most out of it, including finding more of like the hardcore music scene, bands like Emery and Under Oath. And again, I was a drummer. So I was in this whole like subculture of evangelicalism, very pro-life. I even used to wear a shirt when I was younger that said abortion is homicide it was huge print. I mean, you could see the thing from outer space. And on the back, it had 3 statements. You will not silence my message. You will not mock my God. You will stop killing my generation. I wore that shirt while I skateboarded around town. That's just how I grew up, man. That was my life.
Yep, that sounds very familiar. So I know that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Something happened, though. How did your faith start shifting?
I was always a curious person. I always had questions. And I think because I really believed in this Jesus thing and I really believed the messages I was taught, and I made the commitments that I wasn't going to compromise my faith and I was going to follow Jesus no matter where he brought me, I wasn't afraid of like exploring things, right? Or asking questions because, hey, wherever truth is, there is God. I think that maybe late teenage years, I wanted to really own my faith, right? I wanted to really own it big time. And so I took a 3-month mission trip overseas with 2 of my friends. We were in Belgium, Finland, and Germany for a month in each country. And I was also part of like this young adult small group. We called ourselves 11th Hour. It wasn't part of a church. It was our own thing. It just kind of happened organically. Honestly, one of the most formidable times of my life. It really formed me as a human. And I was really starting to get critical of like megachurch culture at this point, right? I wanted the true gospel. I thought that community was the key to the early church model. And I wanted that. I wanted real friends in my life. I didn't want to do superficial anything. I'm a very genuine person. What you see is what you get. So while I'm in Germany, I'm reading the book Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. And that was one of the first times where I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like these social issues I never thought about that maybe Jesus cares about, with like how we treat the poor and how we treat the marginalized. And like, Shane's telling these stories of like how they took over an abandoned building or for folks who were unsheltered to find refuge, and how they would throw money out in Wall Street and dump all the change out in protests of like greed. And I'm like, this is so radical. Like, I love it. Right. So for me, none of that was like liberal. It was just Jesus, right? Because he's making a point that from the Bible, these are like important issues that we should care about. So that's kind of sitting in my head. And I'm in Germany doing this missions work. And then we end up going to Finland, which was really powerful. But then we go to Belgium. And I find out before we get to Belgium that we're going to be working with a church that meets in small groups in bars around the city of Brussels. And I was like, dude, bars. That's where alcohol is served. Like, I don't know if you can do church in a bar. That feels unbiblical. That feels super liberal. And at this point, like I'm kind of a mutt of evangelicalism. Like I've read John MacArthur. I'm also reading Brian McLaren. I'm discovering Rob Bell, but I also know who Paul Washer is and I like him. So I'm kind of pulling from all different streams of evangelical thinking, right? And so my only options were to either go back home. I had no money for a plane ticket or go to Belgium. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to Belgium. And that was a moment where I realized that like church can be done so differently than how I experienced it, right? In these small groups that met around the city and then once a month would come together for an all church meeting. And me and my buddy who were part of that small group 11th hour, we're thinking this is really powerful. And then our host, his name was Horace, he gives me this book. I actually have it on my shelf called Pagan Christianity by a guy named Frank Viola. And the whole premise of the book is that most of our modern church practices come from pagan culture. Now, I'm 18. I'm a straight white man. I am inside the evangelical world, right? So I'm reading with all that heart. I'm ready to storm the castle and find my beauty and be a radical Christ follower. Then I read this book that's like, hey, most of our church practices are pagan. I'm like, holy shit. We gotta reform. Like it's not biblical, right? So I get like real radical. And so does this small group. We come back to New Jersey. We tell our friends, like we show them this book and we go, what if we started practicing intentional community together as like a family? And we did. We did. And it worked for 5 years. It wasn't just like superficial nonsense. We were deeply embedded in each other's lives. We met once a week to do worship and maybe a Bible study, but we were hanging out all day, all the time, Monday through Monday, doing all kinds of stuff. I say this because I wouldn't say I was deconstructing at this point, right? I was
Mhm.
still in the basement of evangelical fundamentalism, but
Mhm.
I was like starting to migrate towards the stairs. I was like, okay, like there's something beautiful about this embodied community piece, right? And
Mhm.
it got me thinking about like what's possible. So all this is happening in my psyche. I want to follow Jesus. I'm thinking about the two greatest commandments, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like this is the most important two teachings. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And throughout that time, there were always little moments where, like, if you think about like this dam that's holding up like the flood of deconstruction, right? There's all these little leaks that are springing. I had an observation of why does the church hate gay people so much?
Mhm.
Now, I wasn't affirming, make no mistake. I thought the
Mhm.
Bible was clear, right?
Mhm.
But like it's just a sin, and there are all kinds of sins, right? I mean, there's a sin of greed. We don't talk about greed. Pastors aren't asking their congregants to look into their checking account to make sure that they're not being too greedy with their money, but like we're obsessed with homosexuality. And so I just had all these moments of like, why are we focusing on this quote unquote sin over other sins? The Bible talks about homosexuality at the time. I thought it talked about it at all, 6 times compared to thousands of times when it comes to the poor and the needy. So I just started seeing like these weird discrepancies. I also met for the first time in my life a real gay person when I was 18. I used to work at Starbucks. And, he totally shifted my perspective of what I thought gay people were like. We still keep in touch to this day, actually. So I had all these moments. And then I started thinking about theology. Like, okay, so I grew up a little more Calvinist. So I'm thinking, so does God predestine people to hell? Like, okay, so the way it works is that God has predestined me to go to heaven, but he's passed over my brother who's not a Christian. He'll burn in hell forever because God is just, and I'll be in heaven forever. And we couldn't control the outcome. Like it was totally up to God to determine these things. I don't know. Then I would ask pastors that question. They would give me answers, but I found the answers insufficient, right? And that was maybe like the key here. It's not that I couldn't ask questions. I just found the answers lacking.
That's totally it. Yep,
Right?
nail on the head.
Like, it's like they have in their back pocket, "Yeah, let's talk about hell." But in their back pocket, it's like, "Well, we're gonna arrive at eternal conscious torment," obviously. Like, there's no real exploration beyond these, like, walls of the basement, right? So all this is happening, and I'm really starting to rethink just, like, what do I believe about the Bible? I discovered the BibleProject podcast. They're blowing my mind. I'm like, just what's inside of this thing? I'm like, "Oh my god, the Bible is so much more complicated than I thought." And then in 2016, Trump comes along, right? And I know this is such a common experience for so many people.
Mhm.
I am no exception.
Mhm.
I was flabbergasted. My flabbers were gasted, Alexis, when the same people who raised me in church, who gave me this super strong sexual ethics, purity culture, don't touch yourself or anyone else until you're married, essentially, right? I mean, that's kind of the standard.
Yep.
And me and my wife, like, we waited we waited for our wedding night. Technically, we waited technically, but we still waited. And, but my point is like, it's like we did the right things because God couldn't use people who were in sexual sin. You couldn't be on the worship team if you were sleeping with your girlfriend or something like that, right?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, the guy on the cover of Playboy magazine, who's caught on a hot mic bragging about sexually assaulting women,
Yep.
who calls people disgusting, who seems to be a real bully. This is the dude that my previous Sunday school teachers are like, we're voting for him because he's the Christian option. And I was like, I'm not trying to be that guy, but you guys told me that when the world tells me to move, to plant my feet and tell the world to move to me. And I feel like you guys are totally capitulating your own values for the sake of like political power. And again, this wasn't a Democrat thing. I voted a third party in 2016. I couldn't vote for Hillary at the time. I was not someone who was like, well, now I'm a raging liberal. I just couldn't jive with like the standards and the moral demands that were put on me and suddenly were jettisoned for a person who clearly was not Christian, even though he tried to pretend that he was, right? Who said, I don't need forgiveness. I couldn't believe that. I was truly shell shocked. Like it blew my mind. So for the next like 3 or 4 years, I was really outspoken against Trump on my personal social media. I had an amateur podcast with two friends. And we were all pretty conservative, very much pro-life, very non-affirming. But like, I didn't like Trump. I couldn't reconcile like this part. And then of course, COVID happens. Black Lives Matter happens. I just saw Christians on the wrong side. And that forced me to re-examine these beliefs because I assumed that if we had the same beliefs, we'd have the same values. And clearly we didn't, right? Like me and this person on my Facebook feed who I knew would align on the Trinity and the virgin birth and Jesus being the only way and the Bible being authoritative. Yet he's retweeting Matt Walsh talking points about George Floyd. And I'm like, how could you do that? It's so dehumanizing to George Floyd. What happened to love your neighbor as yourself, right? So that was kind of how I deconstructed. I didn't know the term existed. And eventually I had this idea in December of 2020. I was so frustrated with like the COVID resistance. I saw Sean Foyt doing his maskless protests. I was on my rocking chair in my front yard and I said, we need a new evangelical movement. Like we need new evangelicals. And that's how I thought of the name. And no one had it. So I just started this random account on Instagram and it blew up and here we are.
One of the reasons I think people are really drawn to your content and your community is because your story is not unique. Your story is a lot of our stories, right? We had very similar, we are lifelong Christians and something broke in us. And that was then a very isolating feeling for a lot of people, I think, within their churches, their church spaces, if they were going or are going to like those same conservative fundamentalist spaces, maybe like they didn't change, but maybe the church around them, they were feeling like changed, right?
Yes, because it did. It like even now, the MAGA loving church that I see, I mean, even in my most conservative churches was not like that. I mean,
Yeah.
the level of like messianic attribution this space gives Trump is like it's shocking to me. And watching so many leaders who claim to read the Bible and be a biblical Christian just jettison so many of their own values or the values I thought that they held for the sake of political power is, I mean, there are so many stories about why we shouldn't do that in the Bible. Even the temptation, right? With Jesus in the wilderness, like the devil gives Jesus the opportunity to have worldly power and he rebukes the devil. And these Christians bow the knee and kiss the ring instead. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is like my critique of that world is not that they take the Bible too seriously. It's that they don't take it seriously enough. Like I feel like I'm a radical Christian compared to these folks. I am way more committed to the way of Jesus than these folks are. That's how I feel about it anyway. Of course they would disagree. But so I think a lot of people have this like narrative of people who deconstruct like want to lose their faith or something. And listen, some people do. Some people they get out of that basement of fundamentalism, they get up out of the house and they go, get me out of here, right? It's so damaging, it's been so harmful. And of course we celebrate that journey for them. God's bigger than any one room or any house in the world of religion for me. But for a lot of us, we get out of the basement and we go, holy shit, there's a whole house that I was underneath the entire time. There's a whole world of other ways to be Christian because that basement told me there's nothing beyond this basement. If I leave, I'm
Yeah.
not a real Christian anymore. If I leave,
Right.
there's only a desert wasteland above ground. But
Yep.
instead, I'm finding dozens, hundreds of rooms, all with their own universes of Christian history and thought and wisdom. So for me, I'm like, well, I'm not a fundamentalist anymore, but I'm certainly more Christian than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really funny. I was talking to Derek Webb, and we were talking about how deconstruction is kind of like not the greatest term, right? Because it means 10 different things to 10 different people. One thing he said was like challenging everybody to like do a faith audit just every once in a while, and just like how that's a healthy thing in spirituality is just to say, hey, let's just take a look at like what I believe, what I think I believe. Let's like return to the Bible and let's like open up our minds to like all these different lenses and different voices that are from Christian experts all over the world. And like maybe challenge some of the things that I potentially have always thought just because I was taught them young, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. I mean, I'm not a huge fan these days of the term deconstruction. I'm not even a huge fan of the deconstruction space these days. I mean, and not because it's like incredibly toxic, but I've seen fundamentalism in those spaces. I see sometimes people act in
Yep.
ways where I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I'm
Yep.
just not in for it. However, the idea of deconstruction, right? It's an amazing tool that is super liberative, but also it's limited. And I think that for a lot of us, especially when we all found each other early on, deconstruction was so helpful. It gave me permission to undo this like desk that I built, right? Realizing I kind of built it backwards. And I was able to line all the pieces out and look at them and re-examine them and see what pieces I want to add or take away. But deconstruction can't help me rebuild the desk in a better way. I need other rooms in the Christian tradition to teach me better ways of assembling this thing so I can just live in a more ethical way according to Jesus, right? It's not like I found the end of deconstruction. I think I have that tool now. It's in my arsenal. I can always re-examine. I don't hold to my beliefs nearly as tightly anymore. However, it's not the only tool that I have. And, a hammer can be used to do a lot of good things, or it can be used to do not a lot of good things. So for me, I just need more tools in my tool belt.
I think what's really important about that is there's this idea out there that, a lot of Christians would need to deconstruct to like find this other place. But I've talked to a ton of people who were raised in more mainline traditions and they don't need to deconstruct. Like they don't even understand what's going on.
Totally.
I have, a friend that I was in InterVarsity in college and she was in Campus Crusade for Christ. And we had never talked about our denomination background or our kind of faith background. And we've been friends for over 20 years. And only recently, when she was listening to this podcast and like all the things I grew up with believing as a Christian, and she grew up believing as a Christian, and she goes, I did not know. I had no idea the things that you were taught in your cultures, right? And we're both Christian, but we practice and believe and lived out our values like really differently.
Yes, exactly, exactly right. I mean, I met people who, I mean, one of our board members, Melinda Hale, she's like, I never grew up in what you grew up in. And I never really deconstructed. I'm like, that must be so nice, right? Because think about it, when you're taught at age 5, if you don't pray a prayer, you're going to burn in hell forever. Yeah, you got to rethink that shit. That's a
Mhm.
harmful belief to hold as a child
Yes.
if you believe it. Right, because
Yeah.
adults have this ability to communicate things to children that are taken at face value. That's
Mhm.
why kids believe in Santa Claus, right?
Mhm.
They're not thinking about the logic of it, or well, how would Santa do all these things, right? At that age. So when you tell them this is how God is, this is what God
Mhm.
wants, this is where you're going to go when you die if you don't do this, it's as believable as the Earth is round, and I'm holding a coffee cup in my hand, right? And so
Totally.
it roots itself deep into your psyche. So you have to deconstruct that. But if you're taught
Yeah.
your whole life that God is loving and loves you and loves your family and wants the best for you, why would you want to deconstruct that? Like, that sounds right? So sign me up.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I am really interested to learn about the cost deconstructing and moving out of some of these faith spaces because that is something I don't hear about enough. I think it's really hard to tell family or your friends or your local church like I'm a Christian but I just see things so differently and this is where I am and this is who I am. It's almost like some sort of coming out to in different ways and there is cost to that.
Well, I think the biggest cost was the cost of my church. So, when I started TNE in December of 2020, I was a professional drummer. I was volunteering my services at a church. I was all in at the church. We were building this amazing worship program up. I loved it. I mean, I was building, for any nerds out there, I was building all the sets in Ableton and like it was a really professional setup. And as a drummer, it's like just a dream. And I was with these people all the time. And we were also building this thing that was a multi church worship night that we would do every other month. It was this huge production. I mean, a full lights set up, everything was timed, and we were networking with other churches in the area, and everyone on the stage would be from a different church during that worship night. So it was really beautiful. At one point, over 700 people would come out to it. It was great. So I was one of the main key drivers behind that as well with a team of 4 people. So I was all in at my church for 6 or 7 years, maybe 6. And, by the time I started TNE, started asking questions online, it started growing. By April, my senior pastor sat me down and said, "Look, we love you, but we can't have you on the stage saying things that go against my teachings off the stage, essentially, because you're a leader, being a drummer." And I said, "Well, I feel like what you're telling me is either have to resign this volunteer role or I have to stop what I'm doing online." He said, "That's correct." So I just shook his hand on the spot and resigned. And then within maybe 1 or 2 months, 90% of those friendships evaporated.
Mm.
And that was tough for me. I'm a type 6 on the Enneagram. I'm a loyalist. Relationships are really important to me. I don't really give up on people super easily. And I'm a very direct communicator. So if I'm like, "You're my friend," you're my friend. There's a certain set of expectations that come with that. Like your beliefs don't change my friendship. So that was pretty painful to realize that 6+ years of serving and being all in and tithing and building this thing and being told, we're on mission together, we're family, I love you, doing these like encouragement circles where you're all crying as you encourage each other, having all of that, just evaporate because I just changed, or I was even entertaining potentially changing some, not even core beliefs, but just beliefs around maybe queer inclusion, or this or that. To have that be like the litmus test was like so hurtful, right?
Mhm.
And like for the record, I don't think that my pastor was like a bad person. He's not Mark Driscoll. I don't think, he was like this abusive person. So I don't tell
Mhm.
people I was abused or spiritually abused. I think he was doing the best that he could with the information that he had. But I think he made the wrong decision. But my pastor's still a good guy. Like he loves his church really well. He retired in a really good way, like, et cetera. So we can hold space for both. But yeah, I mean, it cost me that. It cost me a lot of friendships. When it comes to extended family and parents, like everything is good, but we don't really talk about what I do online because I think it wouldn't be good. I'll put it this way. I didn't deconstruct so I can gain new friends and sin more and make more money. None of those things have really happened. Like
Right.
if I wanted to be rich, I'd become a megachurch pastor. If I wanted to be unaccountable, I'd be a megachurch pastor. If I wanted more friends, I would have stayed at my church. So you don't really deconstruct for those reasons.
Yeah, I feel like you've had this fortunate place to talk with so many people who are Christian or who were raised in Christianity who like maybe don't want to identify right now or have left their local church space because they were like, I know it's not safe here, but like, man, there is nothing like church community, right? Like,
Totally.
I feel like those are the conversations I have with people is like, I miss church community. And so for the people that are out there that maybe want to find another safe church that more aligns with their values, like, how do you think that we can help people find safe churches or give like another church a try?
I'm going to say something controversial. We got to stop using this word safe.
Mm.
Safe churches do not exist because people are there. There's always a risk. There's a reason why in our community stuff online, we don't use the word safe. You will never find the language of this is a safe space because how do you guarantee that, especially in our Facebook group of 10,000 people? How do you guarantee a safe space for 10,000 people when everyone has a different expectation of what safe means?
Yeah.
For some people, safe means you always agree with me. I'm never challenged, and you always respond the way I want you to. For others, safe means I don't want to be abused, right? They're different
Mhm.
metrics of safe.
Mhm.
So I think we have to be honest about like, what does it mean to be in community? Well, community is a risk. Community
Mhm.
is a risk. And I'm actually really passionate about this because, and again, this is controversial for some, so people don't have to take my advice. But like, we got to be honest, like, community, you always risk being hurt, real community. And one of my critiques of digital spaces, and by the way, we're a digital first organization. I'm telling on myself here is that I don't know how you build deep community that's rooted in your full self when you're able to curate your own version of yourself online. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm sure there are people listening who would go, well, no, I have great friends that I met on the internet. I have done that as well. Certainly it's possible. But in my perspective, nothing beats embodied community.
Yeah.
So what happens is, right, is like the church, for a second, let's forget about the spiritual side. The church gives you a sense of belonging to a community because we're a communal people and our culture is so hyper individualistic. So you have this meeting space, this third space where people who are like-minded with a spiritual connection also now are involved in your life. That's powerful and that's healthy. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
When it goes awry, when it gets toxic, when you get kicked out because your beliefs changed, the hurt is deep, right? Maybe for some people they were abused, like physically or sexually abused, right? That's even deeper. That's really deep.
Mhm.
And so whenever you decide to maybe try church again, there's always a risk of being hurt. But I think that what deconstruction does is it gives you a better radar for, is this church going to be at least accountable, right? We're all going to make mistakes. If you and I, Alexis, hung out together at some point, you're going to piss me off, or I'm going to piss you off, or I'm going to say something wrong, or
Yeah,
vice
my
versa.
family pisses me off every day, and I bother them every day, for sure.
Exactly. And so you have
Yeah.
to own it, right? You have to
Yeah,
be able to have that conversation of like, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean this. And so that's just part of being human. Like, we're gonna offend
totally.
each other.
Yep.
That's a spectrum, right? Offending is different than abuse. So there's all different layers to this. But I would say if people want to try church again, first off, look up what the church believes on their website, start there. And then be cautious. Like, when you go, don't just give all of yourself right away. Be cautious. Try and use your new spider sense that you developed, and then also realize that you could be wrong. If you decided to give yourself to this space, you could get hurt again. That's a possibility. I think that sometimes we kind of romanticize community where we're just all holding hands and singing kumbaya and there's never any problems. We kind of like Disneyfy it, right?
Yeah.
That's just not real life.
Mhm.
That's just not.
Yeah.
And so we have to get ready if we're going to try and rebuild anything. I think for me, the question isn't how do we build a perfect or safe church? It's how do we build accountable systems where we can own
Mhm.
our shit. All of
Yeah.
us, by the
Yep.
way, not just me or not just you, but all of us, where
Yeah.
we own our mistakes.
Yeah, you're so right. There is no safe place, and there is nothing that replaces the embodied experience in person. I think a good example of that is we went to Theology Beer Camp. I know you've been several times with
Oh
Trip
yeah.
Fuller. We met there, which was super fun. And it was so amazing to be able to just talk in person with people, right?
Yep.
So different than the distance of social media. You get to like start to know someone and be known, right? Some of my best friends are from Theology Beer Camp. That was, it was like a adult trivia for theology nerds. It's true. Like, even though we have distance, since we had that embodied connection in the beginning, it just is so different, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening as white Christian nationalism pushes on in our country right now. And one of the ways I see that is about the 10 commandments trying to get put into certain schools. And I'm just curious about what you think about that as a Christian. It's your own 10 commandments, it's your own holy book. Why in the world wouldn't you want that in a public school, Tim?
Well, because we live in a secular society. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll put it this way. When you have lawmakers who are making laws to put the Ten Commandments in schools, while their actual schools are tanking in test scores, and they don't care about that or funding them, come on. It's literally virtue signaling. It's literally virtue signaling. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. It's what I talk about most of my time, on the podcast and stuff. But yeah, I mean, white Christian nationalism is a huge problem. And these folks are looking for symbolism to kind of claim America as their own white Christian nation. Now, they won't say white, but that's what they're doing. And not only is it ridiculous, but it violates the rights of other people in the schools. It violates other students of other faiths. We all know, Alexis, that if there was a Muslim group that passed legislation to put whatever the Ten Commandments version of the Quran is in every public school, we would have probably riots outside. Schools would probably be torched to the ground by Christians, right? So they're not looking for religious freedom. They're not looking for religious pluralism. They're looking for religious supremacy. And these kinds of things are, of course, unconstitutional. But again, they violate the rights of our neighbors, right? And again, like we if we're going to get real about it, the kingdom of God in the New Testament is not necessarily a physical place, and it's certainly not a modern day nation. And if you want to do that, go start your own little thing or go start a church. I'm not sure what to tell you, but there are 300 million Americans in this country, many of which do not believe in the Ten Commandments or don't hold the Bible authoritative, and they have a right to live without the burden of those things in public spaces, as our Constitution says. It's just that simple for me. And that's the thing. It's not really about that, is it?
Right.
It's not about this is the moral standard for who should be in
Hmm.
office. It's about conquer. It's about power. It's
Hmm.
about symbolism that says we own this country, that this nation is ours. It's not about the morals behind it, as we know with Trump, right? The fact of the matter is that in this past election, white Christians, not just evangelicals, white Christians voted for Trump in the majority in every single category. White Catholics, I think, were 60%, went for Trump. White liberal Protestants, 55%. in like the more mainline Protestant spaces, and then
Mhm.
white evangelicals 80%. So white Christians voted for this man who
Mhm.
violates all of their sacred beliefs, who violates even a biblical worldview by their own standards, right? He violates so many of those things. It's
Mhm.
not about that. It's about who will give us the power that we need to take over the country. So it's what it comes down to.
Yes, and yet that is a very narrow view of what Christianity is. For example, in the last election, do you wanna know what percentage of Democrats and independents still identify as Christian?
Oh, 60%?
It's oh, man, 59% of
Okay.
Democrats.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
What about in the House?
it's high. Well,
It's
it's
very
high.
high.
It's like
Yes.
90, isn't it? Or
It's
89?
in the Senate, it's around 80-90%. The point is, we are still also on the left, a majority Christian group. However, you wouldn't know that from our media, but a lot of Democrats, the majority actually, come to their conclusions through their Christian faith in Jesus, right?
Yes, yes.
We can be able to stand up and say, "We are Christian too, and our lens is here too, and we are valid too."
Exactly. Again, it's a big house, right? There's so many rooms to explore that are beautiful when it comes to the Christian tradition that take the words of Jesus incredibly seriously. Christian nationalism is very Christian, but it's antichrist in nature, right? If you read the Sermon on the Mount and then read what Christian nationalists want, they're at odds with each other,
Mhm,
right? Christian
mhm.
nationalism says crucify your enemies, and Jesus said love your enemies. They are not the same.
Let's talk about you modeling this approach to good faith dialogue, especially like when you have a conversation with someone that you don't agree with.
Mm.
How do you try to have a good faith dialogue with somebody who disagrees with you and doesn't see the image of God in you?
I think that we have to critique ideas and not people. Saying an idea is shitty versus a person is shitty are different things. And I feel like the second we head on the path of dehumanization, even if it's something that's slight, maybe making fun of what someone looks like or the color of their hair or their fake tan, I just feel like it puts us on the path that can lead towards violence, right? Because I mean, what does Christian nationalism do? It dehumanizes the other. Immigrants are poisoning the blood of society. Democrats are demonic. A demonic spirit is inside of them. These are demons we're dealing with. I mean, Candace Owens famously said that transgender folks are demonic. They are demons. Well, you can't redeem a demon. Like, what do you do to demons? You destroy them, right? So I feel like when we start on that same path, and it can start, we can mask it with humor. Oh, this person has a big forehead. This person's so stupid. Okay, I get that, but like, first off, it doesn't actually address the argument. And number two, just tolerating that for me puts us on a path that I don't want to go down. And so, yeah, we don't do it perfectly, but especially as an organization, we just have a very strict policy of non-dehumanization. It's about who they are. We're never going to call Trump the big orange man. We're never going to make fun of Charlie Kirk's, the facial features. Like it's not our vibe. But we will critique their rhetoric and their actions. We will call their ideas incredibly dangerous. We will oppose them at every step of the way. But we're going to do it in a way that's on principle and about the topic at hand, not about the person that they are. It's just one of those like lines in the sand for us as an org. We don't want to participate in that cycle of chaos, right? I mean, we believe that everyone is made in the image of God, even our enemies. So, what does loving our enemies look like, even as they harm other people? Well, I think obviously it's resistance, but it's also refusing to participate in the cycle of dehumanization that they participate in,
Mhm.
that their whole ethos is based off of.
Yeah. Recently you wore a shirt that said something about the sin of empathy.
So I commit sins of empathy. Yeah, it's our new merch.
It's so great. I think in this day and age in social media, you can just throw out a caption like the sin of empathy, and then people just start saying it and don't even think about like, wait, is that actually biblically based? Why are we believing that? And a United Methodist pastor recently told me empathy is the heart of the gospel. What do you think as a straight white Christian man
It's
yourself?
just so silly, you know? Look, I think that a lot of those folks read the Jesus in Revelation and think that this is who Jesus is, this like guy with a sword and, like just wants to slay his enemies. And no, like the Jesus in the Gospels is who Jesus is. Like that's as close as we can get to the historical Jesus, for better or for worse. And empathy is key, right? Empathy puts us in the shoes of someone else. So we recognize that maybe they don't have it easy. Or maybe like we should feel for their situation, right? When we lack empathy, we watch people rip apart families and celebrate it, which is what we're doing right now. Right? There are people who cheer ICE as they literally rip apart families because they have no empathy. If that was them, they'd probably get violent. I mean, these white Christians stormed the Capitol building on January 6th based on the lie that their election was stolen when it really wasn't. And they got violent. Imagine if the government started ripping apart their families, they would go crazy. But because they have no empathy, they can't see it in someone else because that person deserves it. And so I just think this idea of toxic empathy, first off, it's very classic right-wing talking points. They're always thinking about new little lines. They're really good at branding. They're so good at
Yep.
messaging, right?
Yep.
CRT at one point was a big issue. Groomers are a big issue. DEI hires, woke, the term woke, right? They are so good at branding and getting messaging out there. And so empathy is toxic or toxic empathy. It's just the newest line in a long line of propagandistic talking points to maintain the status quo. Scott Coley, he's the author of a book called Ministers of Propaganda. He talks about this idea of a legitimizing narrative. And there are these stories that we tell ourselves to legitimize certain hierarchies. And right wing media is really good at that. Remember when we said Black Lives Matter and they said all lives matter? Right. But they don't really mean that, though, because right now, brown skinned people are having their lives destroyed. And they're not yelling all lives matter, right? They
Right.
weren't they weren't yelling blue lives matter as their own people beat police officers in the Capitol building with poles.
Mhm.
It's not about the principle, it's about the line to justify why the status quo is okay.
Mhm.
So now it's not all lives matter. Now it's, well, empathy is toxic or can be toxic, or this is an example of toxic empathy that we feel
Mhm.
bad for these immigrants, right? But
Mhm.
but we should also feel bad for Trump, the convicted felon, or we should
Mhm.
feel bad for Ashley Babbitt, who defied Secret Service orders and tried to storm the Capitol and was shot to death. Right?
Mhm.
That's real empathy. But
Mhm.
people being ripped apart from their families, that's just toxic empathy. So
Mhm.
it's always in service to legitimize the narrative that they're of the story that they're trying to tell, that always maintains a status where they're at the top and their enemies are at the bottom.
Mhm.
Always.
Mhm.
Usually that's along racial lines, not every time, right? But there's certain patriarchal norms, heteronormative norms, racial norms that they're always trying to maintain and realize. So
Mhm.
that's how I think about it. It's just the newest in the long line of talking points.
I recently talked to a UCC reverend, and she said that she can often tell when an evangelical joins her church because they bring black and white thinking into social justice spaces.
100%.
What are some self-reflections that we can have?
I mean, look, you can bring the evangelical out of fundamentalism, but you can't always bring fundamentalism out of the evangelical, right? And I say that as someone talking to myself here too. Binary thinking was ingrained in us. The world is broken up into good and bad. You're either good
Absolutely.
or you're bad.
Yep.
Right? You're either this or you're that. And I've seen that type of thinking just applied towards more liberal causes. You're either a complete bigot or you're a true ally. No gray. It's like, well, it's complicated for some people, right? And
Totally.
humans are more complicated than that. Like I know people, for example. I mean, I have people in my life that listen to talk radio their entire life. Loved Sean Hannity talking about immigration and illegal immigration, but then would learn Spanish to talk to the workers on the construction site because he wanted to get to know them and wanted to pay for their lunch. How does that work? That's weird. That doesn't make sense, right? Humans aren't always logical creatures. I'm certainly not. And so I think that, first off, I think that we have to stop thinking that white progressive Christianity is it. I think we have to get into black liberation spaces. We have to start learning from other voices that have a long history in this country of facing oppression and how they resisted it and how they navigated that. I think that we need to stop thinking that we have all these new answers that need to be believed by everyone else. Now, obviously, are there certain things that we shouldn't compromise on? For sure. Queer rights, marginalized rights, for sure. Of course, you fight for those things politically. But how we do that, right? It's a pretty big spectrum of how we do that. How do we get these goals accomplished? And I think also even with like people in this space, I mean, I remember, man, looking back now, there were a couple situations in the deconstruction space that I look back on and I'm like, oof, I think we were just too intense. There was someone, I won't say her name. I had her on my podcast. She was super nice. She was a therapist, super beautiful person, just so sweet. Had an account, kind of found deconstruction. And I don't know, a couple of years ago, she made a course where people could pay $150, $200, and they can get certified as like a deconstruction coach. And this person got bullied so hard by people in deconstruction. She got so attacked for it. She deleted her entire social media presence, and to my knowledge, still doesn't come back. Why? Okay, is it not a great look? Sure. But then just don't buy it. Like, just don't participate. It's not that problematic if someone who's a therapist sells a course. Okay, not the end of the world. And so I look back on the deconstruction space. I'm like, there are moments like that where I go, we were just looking for a body to devour, someone to consume. And again, guilty, like guilty. I would say things to people on social media behind that account that I look back and I'm like, maybe I didn't know the full story. And I learned that because I've been in situations where I know people don't have the full story, but they just make certain assumptions online about me, and they say things where I'm like, "You're so off the mark, it's almost comical, but go off." I end up losing respect for that person or those people, right? Or that organization, whatever it might be. And so that kind of taught me like I should be more careful with how I word things, with how I talk about people. Again, it's complicated. You have to be able to pick your battles and know when to speak up and when not to. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think that fundamentalism can manifest itself in white progressive spaces. Binary thinking can manifest itself in the deconstruction space. And look, again, maybe controversial to say, but I don't think deconstruction and that mode of thinking is like a lifelong mode. Get the anger out. I needed to. I absolutely needed to vent. I need to get the anger out. I needed to be heard. Deconstruction held that for me, right?
Mhm.
People have validated my experience.
Mhm.
I was really mad at my church for a long time over what happened and how it went down. I was angry. And I was right. I had a right to be angry. I got screwed over by my church. And at some point, I realized, how is this anger going to fuel me? Is it going to become bitterness? Or is it going to fuel me to do something different and to become a better person and to do this work on an even bigger level, just to prove them wrong? Like, you know what? You made such a huge mistake, right? And now I look back on the situation, I can tell the story, not feeling super emotional about it, because I've been able to kind of work through it. I've been able to heal from it. And sometimes I wonder if the deconstruction space wants to heal or if we just want to kind of keep yelling, which again, to each their own, do whatever you want. It's a free country. But I think for me as an individual, and even for us as an organization, we're more focused on fighting Christian nationalism, giving people a better path forward in their faith, which also means reconstructing something better instead of just sitting in one spot. The last thing I'll say, maybe an analogy. The moment I started changing my views on this was when it hit me. I thought to myself, okay, let's say that we tear down Hillsong. Let's say that we get what we want. The SBC doesn't exist anymore, Southern Baptist Convention. Hillsong doesn't exist. Then what? Do we just plant the flag on the rubble and say we did it? Or are we trying to build something, hopefully better, also realizing that it's complicated and hard and not easy to build new systems, right? And that people make mistakes. So that's kind of where I started with that thought a couple of years ago and where I am now.
Beer camp, I remember people were like, I just don't know who to trust anymore.
Right.
I don't know who to trust for leaders, for authority. I don't know. I don't know what to do. That question is really important. Who and why am I trusting this person? And if it's a Christian leader or even just a person who identifies as a Christian, like what is the fruit of their spirit? Is that love, patience, kindness, self-control, gentleness, right?
It's almost like now that I'm a parent, I have more empathy for my own parents. Right before I had kids, I was like, I don't get it.
Totally.
Yeah, now I'm like, okay, I get it. Like it's more
Mhm.
complicated. Kids don't do what you want. I think as we try and rebuild new systems of community, I think we're going to have more understanding for how things can go so wrong.
Mhm.
I think we get to a point where we ask ourselves, how did this happen? Like, how did these systems become so unaccountable? And then when you try to start building something new, you're like, oh, I can
Mhm.
see how this can happen, right? I can see how something can fall through the cracks. I can see how, in some cases, maybe a good faith effort to do something was taken the wrong way and became a bigger issue. I can see that now. I couldn't before, but now I can. And it kind of humanizes everything.
Yeah.
Again, that's not to excuse the massive abuse that we see. I don't think white evangelicalism can be redeemed. I think the SBC should go away. Like I'm in that corner
Mhm.
completely. And also I understand how people can build these systems in a way, even if they had good intentions at the time, right? In,
Mhm.
in, in a way that is unaccountable or that is power hungry, etc.
All right, you ready for a lightning round?
Let's do it.
A Christian phrase or church cliche you wish that we would retire.
Hate the sin, love the sinner. Retire that shit.
Something you used to believe but have since let go of.
Eternal conscious torment.
A worship song that still stirs your soul when it comes on.
Ooh, there's actually several. I think the blessing, that one really gets me.
A question that you're still carrying.
Who is God?
A book, a sermon, or a podcast that's really rocked your world.
Ministers of Propaganda. Great book.
Something you miss from church.
Oh, I miss playing worship. I miss it so much. I miss drumming.
A Bible verse that means something to you.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the one.
Tim Whitaker, thank you so much for being on the Sacred Slope today. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. A lot of fun.
Thank you for being with us today on the Sacred Slope. If you'd like to nominate a pastor, priest, or reverend, send me an email at alexis@thesacredslope.com. Music by Brett Rutledge, Eddie Irvin, and Sean Spence. I'm Alexis Reich. May the fruit of the Spirit guide you this week. Go in peace, friends.
There's beauty in unraveling, safety in the questioning. Home is where you're wandering. You're right where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be.